What is it like working in museums? My overall experience and why I quit. Hi, my name is Ray, and I'm an artist in North Texas. I'm a recovering museum nerd, and I want to share my experiences working in museums around the country with you, what it was like behind the scenes, and ultimately, why I left museums as a career. Education and background. As a child in suburban Texas, I often said to my STEM parents that I wanted to be a forensic anthropologist and work with artifacts, mummies, and art in a basement with no people and live in a tiny house. I'd practiced spying on relatives like Carmen Sandiego and requested collectible antiques like skeleton keys for my birthday. At university, I majored in art history and dance and secured a graduate degree abroad before dropping out of my PhD in art history in 2018 and leaving museums behind. My dance journey and academic journey are separate stories for another day. Right now, I want to focus on the years I spent working in museums, which is part of a larger field colloquially known as GLAM, GLAM, for galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. Many of my experiences overflow into these other areas as well. Speaking up. I addressed this topic broadly a few years ago on my artist website and shared it with my former art history professor. But I decided to revisit this timeless topic in a new space and format. I had been outspoken about my troubles within the museum institutions I worked for and on social media for years before it was popular to do so. It got me labeled as a complainer or threat, and that solidified in me museums were not my safe space and never were. I'm sure things have changed since I left the field in 2018, the year Black Panther was released. With an opening scene in an encyclopedic museum, the pivotal anti-hero rips apart the racist colonial methods and ideals of the institution. Real-life changes in the field also came on the heels of the public murders of Black folks by police, national protests, the Me Too wave, a recession, and other national and international crises unfolding from 2020 onwards. But these changes were short-lived, or too little too late for someone like me. I briefly went back into the arts for employ in 2022, and it was the same-ish, different day. Why haven't museum environments improved? In my observation, competition. Museum employees retain their same position for decades or lifetimes, and they do not want their operation to change or to feel threatened by perceived competition to their position or power. Crowded airspace. Repeating the same hashtags and talking points can flatten and water down nuanced meaning over time. There are also many problematic or privileged people regurgitating the talking points as those they target, so the air has been muddled and sullied with fake activism. Many museum activists are artists or people of color who are aggressively silenced, like being kicked out of the building and banned, fired, or arrested, while white employees co-opt their concerns for career clout. Money. When museums see that ticket sales, memberships, and donations will be affected by current practices, executives may start making new choices. The main reasons for my departure are 1. Sexual harassment, 2. Funny money, 3. Safety concerns and hazards, 4. Female rivalry, 5. Racism, exclusion, and bias. But all of these reasons hold equal weight with me. Lastly, I'll talk about what I'm doing to move forward and upward. Sexual harassment, a normalized discomfort. I became disgusted and hopeless at the rampant sexual harassment in the museum world and glam at large. When one rat was defeated, a super rat would pop up to take their place. In the creative industries, there are some people who believe, in their deranged minds, that it is a boundaryless environment with open access to the women therein. From janitors to guards to curators and department directors, anyone at any time could be the perpetrator against me. I experienced men making sexual gestures, saying lewd comments, attempting to initiate affairs, staring, and suggesting innuendo so passive it could easily be denied as an offense. No matter how I chose to address the issue, it seemed it was a losing game. Keeping the issue hush-hush, confronting the person directly, or telling HR were all risky methods at protecting myself with uncertain results. Unfortunately, I've dabbled in many job fields, and sexual harassment is never ending. It's just a normalized discomfort. Funny money. Poverty amid opulence. It was tough to walk into work on marble floors, passing priceless paintings in the galleries and fancy silk scarves in the gift shops, to sit in a shabby office for very little wages. I was working one or two outside jobs my entire museum career, selling sandwiches at a grocery store, teaching kids dance lessons, or folding sweaters at retail shops after work. Top-level museum and gallery personnel or professors dropped their kid off in my dance class, browsed for sweaters and shoes while I was on the clock, or bought sandwiches while I cleaned the glass. The most I had been paid in a museum was $28,000 net income, and in the arts library field, about $30,000 net income. Most of my museum jobs were hourly or grant and donor funded. There were times when I suspected a withholding of funds, misappropriation of funds, or skimming off the top of these grants and donations. I had never secured a full-time salaried position, and if I wanted to keep trying, that meant moving all over the country or the world. Again, most museum staff keep their job for decades or lifetimes because the field has been traditionally very small and specialized. I chose to enter a niche career field and plan to stay for the long haul. Over the years, I had spent 6 months or 3 months here or there, unemployed, waiting on a callback for that special museum job. But it was getting a bit ridiculous after a certain age. I started to blame myself for my struggling situation, knowing there were better paying jobs in other fields or self-employment options. As I progressed in the museum world, it was clear that most of the job was social climbing, to gain upper crust alliances for the purpose of securing their money. High-level jobs had benefactors' full names and spouses attached to them. For example, the Robert R. Roberts and Rebecca R. Roberts Associate Curator of Art. These museum institutions were created, in part, to be the playgrounds for the rich, and that hadn't changed. There were plenty of times I spoke out against such cattle branding in favor of more universal billing for the donors. Example, the Roberts Family Art Center. My last job at an arts council in 2022 was a full-time salaried position at $50,000 gross income. I was fired after 1 month in retaliation for refusing my married male boss's sexual advances, among other sins. Bonus category, human resources. Gatekeepers in the ivory tower on the hill. I believe museum HR should be a neutral third-party contractor or an outside company, since internal staff are not adequately doing the job. While I had some stellar HR experiences with highly professional women who truly cared, many HR personnel in museums have been rude and unprofessional. There were too many times that my confidential HR documents were in the hands of a colleague far from the HR office, or when gossip included people's private HR business. For most of my museum job applications, for over 10 years, the salaries were rarely posted, and I usually did not hear a word back from HR about the status of my application. No receipt of application and no rejection letter, just anxiously waiting in a silent void. It was understood that if you hadn't heard back in 3 months, you didn't get the job. Considering moving forward in a museum career often means moving cities or states, I found that method extremely irresponsible. When I'd call these museums for follow-up, HR would say, "Well, we had 100 applicants. We can't get back to them all." I'd always respond, surely an automated email stating that you received our applications could be distributed. Surely shortlists could be generated in a software program so that rejection letters could be batched and sent out. All museum jobs handle memberships, artwork, donations, children, or cleaning supplies by the hundreds, thousands, and millions. HR has no excuse for mishandling 100 applications. Other times, I'd be met with a response that the museum already knew who they wanted to hire. They just put out an ad for appearances. I met so many young people who just showed up for work and messed around the office or fell into full-time employ because they were the daughter, niece, or family friend of a top-level staff. There were also lots of fake jobs advertised at museums to solicit applications, allowing the museum to prove on paper they were in demand as an employer. This might have been to secure loans, grants, and donations for salaries of jobs they never planned to fill, or for tax reasons I don't know, but I know I've been caught in that trap. Lastly, I found that many HR professionals in museums did not have any experience in the field, so job descriptions or the tasks related to them were not always familiar to these people. Even with robust covering letters, which were probably never read, HR professionals seemed to have a foggy idea of how my skills and knowledge were transferable to other roles. In addition, so much stereotyping in museum takes place. Certain roles were put in a box. Curatorial roles are stereotyped as snobby, so applying to an off-shooting role was difficult because it meant convincing a stranger to see beyond an industry trope. Safety concerns and hazards. It's not worth dying for. Most museums and other glam institutions were hoarded palaces filled with fire hazards, leaks, excessive dust, and mold. While there is protocol, best practice, and industry-wide standards for safety, storage, and emergencies, they were inconsistently put into play throughout the museums for which I worked. We never had staff drills, orientations, or training to help ourselves or patrons of the museum in the event of fire, flood, tornado, natural or unnatural disasters. These huge buildings are a maze of hallways, staircases, and two-way elevators. On a good day, I could easily get lost. I recall one fire drill in over a decade in the field. I also deeply resented the lack of concern top-level staff had for our safety regarding offensive artwork or stolen cultural objects. I was shocked by the number of intentionally inflammatory, provocative, or offensive artwork and exhibitions with no protocol for how to deal with potential resulting danger from extremists emboldened by these messages. And while glam institutions are protected by a 1954 UNESCO convention protecting them from search or seizure during wartime, history tells us that is not observed, and I felt extremely vulnerable. Female rivalry. My heels aren't high enough. While upper-level executives or board members are historically and statistically male in most museums, studies show the office staff is predominantly white women. The petty working environments of many museums was stifling to my professional growth and drove me out of the profession. It's not a lack of women supporting women. It's a matter of women bullying and sabotaging other women. Gossip, lies, eye-rolling, snickering, strategic tears, mean girl cliques, passive aggression, obsession, fake friends, baby voices, intimidation, interference disguised as help, jokes disguising true intentions, being set up or being put down in conversation were daily occurrences rooted in jealousy, unnecessary competitiveness, or racial bias. Many of my projects, written proposals, or ideas imparted in meetings were swiped from me to pad the careers of someone else. I've even had line items on my resume stolen and exaggerated, which landed another woman jobs and connections. A respected female colleague once told me, "My heels aren't high enough," before she too quit the glam field. Worse still, sexual harassment was not shared by other women for protection, or I was disbelieved when it happened to me. I have been publicly mocked or given the cold shoulder and abandoned in my time of need by female colleagues or top-level female staff. We have to do better by each other. Bonus category, art journalism, hipster tabloids. For far too long, art news outlets were gossip sites for outrageous industry drama or pretentious, out-of-touch opinion editorials by critics. Journalists and critics win awards worth tens of thousands of dollars, while the artists they write about hardly sell singular paintings worth the writing prize. Quality emerging artists were not getting shine or press in favor of the art press recycling the same old showstoppers for clout and sales or clicks. Real-world concerns affecting museum staff, women, or artists of color were ignored. Sometimes this was deliberate. Mistreated museum staff, activists, sexual harassment victims, exploited artists, or those experiencing undeniable racism are still flatly rejected for stories and editorials, or ghosted and ignored after false promises of a platform. Even through 2020, reporters and critics were actively blocking and deleting comments from dissenters. I've been blocked by reporters or lied on in major publications. This is because news outlets and reporters benefit by staying on the good side of museum institutions for event invites, connections, donor affiliations, and steady press that sells. Comments, complaints, and letters to the editor from people like myself have greatly shifted art writing in major publications. Of course, events from 2020 pushed art writers to take their first world jobs a bit more seriously. Racism, exclusion, and bias. Your diversity just walked out the door. Stolen global artworks and artifacts are the most obvious ways in which the racist colonial origins of museum institutions are still upheld. To avoid getting those artifacts out of storage and opening up a gateway for having to give them back to their countries of origin, many are not on display. Many global art and craft are dated for when they were taken, and not necessarily when they were made. International conventions meant to address the issues of stolen art and repatriation from the years 1970 and 1995 are not retroactive, meaning artworks stolen prior to the year 1970 were very well grandfathered into museum collections, and I witnessed this notion being upheld several times. That meant everything from Nazi-seized paintings to mysteriously found folk art and colonizer booty were firmly set into museum collections worldwide with accepted gaps in the provenance. Slowly, stolen artwork is being repatriated to their original owners, and more transparent research is being published. While the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation created and released a survey on the deficits in museums regarding people of color, and subsequently funded several undergraduate fellowships at predominantly white institutions, none of that research or funding ever trickled down to me as an individual. If this movement leaves me in the dust, is it really forward movement at all? No. It's pandering to a generation of Black folks too young to be the competition of my peers. It's an industry that created a problem of racism and then pretended to save people from the problem they started. Ironically, many of the institutions that hosted temporary Mellon Diversity Fellows rejected me from full-time employment. A better use of resources could have been to endow positions at historically ethnic museums, donate to their acquisition funds, or support repairs to the building, for example. I was indirectly a data point in the Mellon study, despite the fact that no one ever contacted me. Today, I'm extracting that data point and enlarging it to examine the detail. My anecdotal story is a valid case study of the museum experience for people of color. Much of the disrespect mentioned above in this article could very well be rooted in racial bias. When I am different from the majority in any given environment, whether that's being African American, brown skin, or natural hair in predominantly white spaces, or even short, younger looking, unmarried, or childless among other women. It's easy to conclude these differences are butterfly effects planting bias in the minds of others, thereby altering the course of my experience. When HR releases statements like, "We encourage people of diverse backgrounds to apply," it makes no sense to disrespect an entire applicant pool with unprofessional or negligent treatment, thereby missing stellar diverse applicants in the process. In addition, to assume diverse candidates are not qualified and applying to open positions is absurd. We are. To relegate diverse staff in museums to diversity roles in the ephemeral DEI sector seems unfair. Better solutions are to have higher quality application procedures and consider qualified people of color for ordinary museum roles. In addition, museums should consider creating special departments for areas like African American art, just like every other area of art history. As a hired museum employee, I've experienced everything from overtly racist comments to petty disregard and gross disrespect, or being fully neglected. My coworkers might display selective cooperation or weaponized incompetence towards me when I was completing my tasks, which made me appear incompetent myself, hard to deal with, or just plain unwanted. Some people were committed to misunderstanding my written and verbal communications, villainized my communications, or repeated my speech with exaggerated ebonics and mannerisms to get laughs. I would be stereotyped as unfriendly or mean-looking even after saying hello and exchanging chit-chat. My professional, polite social niceties gained me no ground in my efforts to humanize myself. I was often told I was wrong or unintelligent, directly or indirectly, regarding my scholastic work. My credentials and education were mocked, while white women held managerial roles without the industry standard qualifications or university degrees. I was often told to stop working on projects I was assigned or to complete, or that I created myself. Ironically, certain people would then take credit for my work or take my ideas and execute them without me. After all of this, it was not uncommon to be tokenized as a person of color to benefit the museum. A perfect example, I have been asked several times to take off my work ID badge and pose for marketing photos as a fake museum visitor to attract Black customers, while my professional headshots were never taken by the museum's photographers like everyone else, and while my scholastic work was not being publicized, greenlit, or encouraged. Intrinsically linking diversity and hardship meant that many opportunities specifically calling for diversity were formed around the personal traumas of the applicant, instead of merit or areas of academic specialization. In turn, those hardships would be used against the applicant before, during, or after hire. The idea that a committee of white strangers creates a battle in the applicant pool with trauma as weapons for a museum job was strange and unfair. The idea that a Black candidate who has atypical hardships, or none to speak of, is not an authentic representation of a diverse world is wrong. Their research, point of view, or professional experience may just well be diverse. Many Black academics or artists are told we need to focus solely on Black history, art, and culture, or told to stop and are blocked from doing so. Either way, it robbed me of my free will and agency to select my own area of interest like other scholars were allowed to do. However, white scholars who specialized in Black culture are habitually coddled and celebrated by colleagues in art press, while actual diverse scholars are downplayed or deemed less intelligent. I have been told several times that Black people don't know anything when discussing my own research or areas of interest. Many times, white scholars specializing in Black culture rarely reach out, reciprocate, or form community with scholars of color from my experience. Instead, I have experienced put-downs, avoidance, or unnecessary competitiveness from white scholars. Competing for attention with my working relationships, alliances, and friends of color, or competing with my interactions with children of color, patrons, etc., are all examples. On occasion, I meet white people in the museum world who have a fanatical, obsessive fixation on black folks, and it's uncomfortable. Their vindictiveness towards me for my indifference is an odd and abrupt switch of energy. On occasion, white people are caught in the glam field, pretending to be light-skinned black folks, leveraging tokenism and white adjacency in one strange swoop to gain cultural leadership roles and a seat at the table. I am not obligated to celebrate or serve anyone using my heritage for clout and career while I am being sidelined for living in this skin. There were many model minorities who have sacrificed their own personhood or personal comfortability to conform to or shrink within white supremacist scenarios. Other times they were grifting and scheming to manipulate and get ahead. It was not uncommon to be befriended, then used or backstabbed by a model minority. I do not ordinarily associate with the strange kinds of people I just mentioned, and I would rather not be exposed to them in a forced office setting. Museums seem to be where they fester, so it's not the best environment for me. I'm a direct descendant of the Tulsa Race Massacre of Greenwood District, Tulsa, Oklahoma, via my grandfather's survival, and a credentialed museum professional. It's been disheartening to see how fake and exploitative the museum industrial complex can be about this moment in history. I have met a few people with good intentions, evidenced by respectful communication with me and quality work surrounding the event. However, there are several people and institutions exploiting that historical moment, my grandfather's image and my grandmother's recollection of my grandfather's experience, while treating me with extreme disrespect in the process. For so long, no one knew what the Tulsa Race Massacre was, and I was disbelieved as a descendant or any scholastic reference I made to it. Conclusions, solutions, revolutions. Reframing my life. I no longer see the museum of my childhood imagination as a place for my adult self, and I no longer define myself by a day job in someone else's building. While I might be employed, it's not my identity. I learned that my passions can be wholly separate from the ways I make money, or I can channel money-making passions on my own terms as a small business owner. I believe that my complaining, letter writing, comment sharing, solo protesting initiatives towards museums and art news publications have created ripples of change, and I have channeled those ripples into waves with pro se lawsuits against abusive institutions. While I may not win them all, the effort of placing serious concerns into legal documents and public record is important. I have been making my own artwork and developing my own projects to make my own personal history. All the tasks I enjoy doing within a museum can be done on my own for the benefit of my art. I love to work, make, create, build, read, research, and write, and I'm not ashamed to say it in our anti-work social climate. But my energy is now focused on me and not wasted among others who refuse to appreciate it. I have spoken with Black reporters, university archivists, and graduate students about my museum journey to add to a historical record of the Black arts experience. I haven't given up on museums entirely. I am supporting historically and predominantly Black, Latino, Native American, and Asian museums as always. I've had stellar experiences with the staff of such institutions, and I hope to visit and partner much more as an artist. Go where you are loved. These spaces were created for us to thrive. Thanks for joining me, and have a pleasant day.